Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Happy New Year. Okay, so we will try to get through the winter this year. Even though occasionally if there's heavy snow or expected snow, then we will have to cancel, since I don't want people driving on snowy roads. Okay, we have been working our way through the Satipatthana Sutta, that's the discourse on the foundations of mindfulness. And as you know, there are 4 foundations of mindfulness, or 4 established things of mindfulness. That is on the body, feelings, states of mind, and then dhammas, or phenomena. And last time we finished treating the contemplation of the body. And now we come to Vedananupassana. This is contemplation of feelings. And one thing I should say about my understanding of the 4 Satipatthanas, the 4 established things of mindfulness, even though they're distinguished as 4, but we shouldn't see them as being inevitably separate practices in which one engages, but rather these 4 foundations of mindfulness, especially the first 3, are, as it says, they're interwoven, because experience doesn't occur in exclusive sections: bodily experience, states of feeling, states of mind, but rather always bodily experience occurs together with experience of feeling, and within bodily experience there arise states of mind. And so within, let us say, the living tradition or stream of meditation practice, different teachers take different approaches to the development of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Some tend to separate these into 4 different areas and sometimes focus on one, focusing primarily on the body, primarily on feelings, primarily on states of mind. For example, one popular teacher, Goenka, Sri Goenka, begins with contemplation or with mindfulness of breathing, which is a bodily practice, but then he moves into the contemplation of sensations, which he takes to be contemplation of feelings. And then he teaches that one should practice exclusively the contemplation of feelings, and just when different states of mind arise, one doesn't attend to them as states of mind, but rather one attends primarily to the feelings that arise in response to those states of mind. But other teachers, for example, Mahasi Sayadaw, in his system of what's called dry insight meditation, begins with the bodily object, that is observation of the rising and falling of the abdomen, but then he brings all 4 types of mindfulness, all 4 establishments of mindfulness into his method of practice. So whenever any particular feeling arises, then one notes that feeling. When particular states of mind arise, one notes those states of mind until one can move into the contemplation of whatever arises at any of the 6 sense bases. Okay, so when we look at the Satipatthana Sutta, at the way the 4 foundations of mindfulness or 4 establishments of mindfulness are laid out, one can take, for example, the contemplation of the body, and even sometimes just one particular exercise within the contemplation of the body, and see it virtually as being an entire self-sufficient path. For example, one might take mindfulness of breathing, and one can use mindfulness of breathing starting from the very beginning and then following it through all 4 stages that are laid out here, and then one goes into the refrain on contemplating the body internally, externally, both, contemplating the nature of arising, nature of falling in the body, nature of vanishing, and so on. And that could become, in itself, a self-sufficient path to liberation. Which doesn't mean that one will not be attending to feelings, to states of mind, and to dhammas, but just the way it's laid out in the sutta, just if one takes the 4 sections on contemplation of the body, and then the sections on insight that are attached, the section on insight that's attached to it, one could use that as the primary vehicle, and then just bring in feelings, states of mind, and dhammas incidentally as developments out of that contemplation of the body. But alternatively, an alternative approach is to see a progression taking place in the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So one begins with the body as the grossest, call it the coarsest, the most obvious domain of contemplation. And then as one begins with the body, trying to observe, for example, the breath, the rising and falling of the abdomen, or just attending to the body as a physical object, at some point feelings begin to impinge upon one's experience and to claim a greater share of one's attention. Okay, so this then moves us from contemplation of the body into contemplation of feeling. Okay, now when we speak of contemplation of feeling, first we have to understand what exactly is meant by this word feeling in the context of, say, Buddhist meditative practice. Here let's use the Pali word vedana. Okay, the English word feelings ordinarily suggests things like emotions, moods, one's evaluations of things. How do you feel about that painting? How do you feel about, say, going into New York City today? Okay, but the word vedana in Buddhism is not used in this broad way, but rather it's used in a much more specific way to signify what I use a rather difficult expression, I call it the affective tone of experience. Not effective, but affective. Yeah, by affective tone, what I mean is how does one find a simpler expression? The affective coloring of experience, the way particular experience feels And maybe expression will become clearer if we simply take the basic distinctions among types of Vedana in Buddhism. The Buddha divides Vedana, or feelings, into three types. There's pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and then there is a feeling which is neither pleasant nor painful, called the Sukkhama Dukkha Vedana. Or the Dukkha Sukha, neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Dukkha Sukha, neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Now, according to the Buddha, all experience is accompanied by some feeling. Usually, we speak about having feelings only when we're undergoing some intense experience, some intense pleasure, then we say we're experiencing a pleasant feeling. Some strong pain, then we say we're experiencing painful feelings. But other times we say that we don't have any feeling. But in the Buddhist analysis of experience, every occasion of experience is accompanied by one or another of these feelings. And so the contemplation of feeling, this particular exercise in mindfulness, is designed to, you could say, to light up the experiential field in order to illuminate the feelings that are occurring on every occasion of experience. And as the mindfulness becomes stronger, as it develops momentum, consistency, through repeated practice, then one can light up or illuminate the feelings that are occurring on subtler and subtler levels until one can tune into even the momentary feelings that are occurring on each individual occasion of experience. As the mindfulness becomes stronger, just speaking somewhat metaphorically, one moves from what I would call the gross ordinary experience of feelings down to the experience of feelings at the cellular level. Then, as the mindfulness becomes still stronger, one moves from the cellular level to the molecular level, then from the molecular level to the atomic level, then from the atomic level to, maybe you could call this the quantum level of feeling, so that one is experiencing feelings just one after another at 100th or 1,000th of a second. Okay, according to the Buddha, feeling arises from something called contact. This becomes of particular importance in the formula of dependent origination, but also it helps us to understand somewhat more clearly the nature of feeling in relation to the practice of mindfulness. Okay, what is contact? The Pali word phassa literally means touching. Okay, these suttas, the Buddha's Discourses, explain contact as the coming together, the meeting of three things: the sense organ, or maybe better, the sense faculty, the object, and consciousness. So all three of these, we can say these are the three preconditions for contact to occur. So maybe we'll rephrase that, the three conditions for contact to occur. But the way I say contact, I would explain it more specifically as the meeting between consciousness and the object occurring through a sense faculty. So the sense faculty is the door. In fact, the Pali uses dwara. It's the door or gate through which consciousness goes out and meets the object. And so depending upon the particular sense faculty, there are 6 types of contact. There's contact through the eye, contact through the ear, contact through the nose, contact through the tongue, contact through the sense of touch, sometimes called the body, the bodily faculty, and then contact internally through the mind. And then from this contact of consciousness with the object through the sense faculty, okay, that is the contact, and then from that contact a feeling arises. And this feeling can be either pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant. Any of these 3 kinds. And now feeling plays a very important role in Buddhist psychology, because feeling functions as the basis, or you could say it's a triggering condition for states of mind. And in particular, there's a close correspondence between particular feelings and particular defilements. We know that the aim of Buddhism is the elimination, the eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion. And so greed, hatred, and delusion, those are the 3 root defilements. And these 3 root defilements are correlated with particular feelings. And so pleasant feelings, which of the 3 root defilements is connected with pleasant feelings? Speak up. Greed, right. So there's a natural tendency to form attachment to pleasant feelings, because one enjoys pleasant feelings, correct? And so one wants to enjoy more of it, and so there takes place a holding or grasping to the pleasant feeling. So that is attachment or greed. When painful feeling arises, what kind of defilement, unwholesome root does it trigger? Which of the 3? Yeah, hatred, aversion, dislike, because there takes place a feeling of aversion towards the unpleasant feeling, and then aversion towards the external cause of that feeling. And then painful feelings can, if they're persistent, they can set off enduring oppressive moods of being oppressed, being afflicted, gloominess, feelings of depression. So many of these stem from deep underlying sources of unpleasant feelings. And then the feeling that's neither pleasant nor painful, what we call neutral feeling, what particular unwholesome root is that connected with? Speak more loudly. Yeah, it's connected with ignorance or delusion. And the reason is because this feeling is subtle. One ordinarily doesn't pick up on it. And because it's subtle, one doesn't observe that this feeling also is subject to arising and passing, that it's impermanent. And so that kind of feeling can maintain the underlying ignorance or delusion. And also this feeling of, we call this a kind of dull comfort, of being not excited by pleasure, not oppressed by pain, but being in a kind of dull comfort, maintains or just nourishes an inner dullness of mind, called a sense of complacency, non-recognition of the unsatisfactory nature of ordinary mundane experience. And so most people live on a kind of swing or seesaw of pleasant feeling and painful feeling, going from one to the other, from the other back to the one, and in between sinking in this neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Okay, so what one has to do to begin to develop wisdom or insight is to clearly perceive the nature of the feelings that one is experiencing. And this is what takes place in the contemplation of feeling. Okay, so going to the text, we're on page 285 of the book. The Buddha says, "How does a monk dwell contemplating feelings and feelings? Here, when feeling a pleasant feeling, a monk understands, or he knows, he's aware, I feel a pleasant feeling. When feeling a painful feeling, he understands, I feel a painful feeling. When feeling a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he understands, I feel a neither painful nor pleasant feeling." Okay, this seems like a very simple statement, but even though it's simple, it has profound implications. What one is doing when one experiences the feeling is simply noting that one is experiencing such and such a feeling, either pleasant, painful, or neither. And now what ordinarily happens when we experience the feeling is that we don't note the feeling as such, but we buy into the feeling. We swallow the feeling. We identify with the feeling. And then by identifying with the feeling, by swallowing the feeling, then we become the victim of the emotional state that is triggered off by the feeling. Either greed and attachment, hatred, aversion, oppression, dejection, for this dull complacency, which is a manifestation of delusion. So now, instead of swallowing the feeling, what one is doing is objectifying the feeling. That is, one is stepping back from one's subjective experience of the feeling and turning the feeling into an object of observation. One is treating the feeling simply as a mental event. It's a very powerful, it could be a very powerful mental event. It could be a very influential mental event. But one is simply observing it and noting the feeling according to its type. In the course of meditation, often the first feeling, if one is practicing over a long period, say on an extended retreat, the first feeling that becomes particularly noticeable, that sort of clamors for attention, is painful feeling. Because as one is sitting with the legs crossed, day, hour after hour, day after day, at times strong feelings will arise in the legs, sometimes in the arms, sometimes back, wherever there are vulnerabilities in the body. And so one will be tempted to start moving about and shifting the position. But one way to strengthen the practice is not to move as soon as one starts feeling pain in a particular place. But initially, if one is working with the primary object, one will just simply note the painful feeling briefly, pain, and then go back and try to focus on one's primary object, say the in and out breathing, the rise and fall of the abdomen. But if the pain becomes very strong, very persistent, of course if it really becomes overwhelming, then one can just mindfully readjust the posture. But before doing that, one could focus in on the painful feeling, put aside one's primary meditation object, and just observe the painful feeling. And then one starts to notice first the quality of the painful feeling. Pains have, usually when we experience a pain, we just feel some dislike and some aversion towards it, and our immediate impulse is just to get rid of the pain. But what one does when one makes pain the object of meditation is to observe this pain. And as one is observing it, one begins to notice different qualities, different flavors to the pain. Sometimes some pains can be sharp and shooting, others can be dull and oppressive, others can be throbbing pains. Irritating pains, the pain of irritation, pain of the pressure, pain of maybe a hot sensation, a cold sensation. So pains come in different flavors, different colors, and one just watches these different flavors, these different colors of the pain. Just noting them, letting each occur as long as it lasts, not identifying with it, but just treating it purely as a mental object. And as one does so, instead of feeling the aversion to the pain and feeling compelled to get rid of the pain, one finds that the pain becomes very interesting. Sometimes it can even become fascinating. It's not that one is becoming a masochist, but one starts to see how different, how there are so many different types of painful sensations. And one could observe the painful sensations going through different phases. Sometimes the pain will shoot up to a high level of intensity. Maybe it's a little bit like the chart which shows how the stock market is doing, or how it used to do back in the good old days. Sometimes up and down, sometimes continuing at a high level, and dropping down a little bit, continuing at a low and medium level, then up, down, And so one is observing this flow, or maybe better, a succession of painful sensations. One is able to discern the different qualities of the pain: shooting, dull, throbbing, burning, flaring up, irritating, scintillating, pressing. One observes the different sensations of the painful feeling, and one knows or starts to see how all of these painful sensations are impermanent. 1 second there'll be a sharp pain, it's finished. Then there's a dull pain, then there's an oppressive pain, the throbbing pain. But each one just arises, it exists maybe for some time, appears to exist, then it vanishes. And then even while a particular type of pain is enduring, is lasting, as the mindfulness and clear comprehension becomes stronger, more developed, again one just immerses the mind in that particular painful sensation, and then one sees how from second to second, even while the pain appears to be continuing the same, it's actually made up of, we call this micro moments of sensation. And each of these micro moments is just a flash of sensation, followed by the next flash, followed by the next flash. Okay, then there come times when either one overcomes the painful sensation and one can move back to one's primary object, or if the pain becomes too strong, then one readjusts the posture and one can return to contemplation of the primary object. Then there'll come times as one is contemplating the primary object when the mind becomes well focused on the object. And as the mind becomes well focused, then joy arises, and along with joy there comes pleasant feelings. Okay, so what could happen if one doesn't use mindfulness, when the pleasant feeling arises, then one latches onto it and thinks, wow, what a beautiful sensation of bliss I'm experiencing. I've never felt anything like this before. Let me keep it. And so one tries to grasp onto that pleasant feeling. And when one grasps onto the pleasant feeling, usually what happens to it? What happens when one thinks, I want to keep that pleasant feeling? Yeah, one loses it. Okay, so the way to safeguard against that happening is to use the contemplation of feeling simply to note when there's a pleasant feeling, one notes pleasant feeling has arisen, and one just labels it as a pleasant feeling and then lets it go. And then one finds as one lets go of that pleasant feeling, what happens? Often it could vanish, but if one lets go of it, yeah, it can become, it persists and it's become even stronger. The pleasure will deepen as one lets go of the attachment to the pleasant feeling. the desire to retain it, to preserve it. Okay, and then the third feeling is the feeling that's neither painful nor pleasant. This kind of feeling can arise in the early stages of practice before one is experiencing either strong pains or strong pleasure. And also it arises at higher stages of practice when even the pleasant feeling subsides and one moves into a state of calm equanimity. Again, one might become attached to that neither painful nor pleasant feeling, but just by observing that feeling, by noting it, then one puts up that protective, we call this a protective shield that prevents one from becoming attached to it. Okay, so now we have, first, the text gives us three distinctions between the three kinds of feelings. But now the text is going to take each type of feeling and then distinguish it into two types, or we could say two subcategories. Okay, here we have in the text, when feeling first I'll read the translation, then I'll explain the terms. When feeling a carnal pleasant feeling, he understands, I feel a carnal pleasant feeling. When feeling a spiritual pleasant feeling, he understands, I feel a spiritual pleasant feeling. When feeling a carnal painful feeling, again he understands. When feeling a spiritual painful feeling, again he understands. When feeling a carnal, neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he understands it. When feeling a spiritual, neither painful nor pleasant feeling, again he understands it. Okay, so here the text makes a distinction in each primary type of feeling between two subordinate types. Okay, the key word here is the word amisa. The word amisa, the way it's ordinarily used in the text, to give some example, it's used for the bait that a fisherman puts on the hook in order to catch fish. That is called amisa. It's something, call it substantial that can be eaten. The word amisa is also used in relation to material things. For example, we speak about an amisa puja. That would be an offering of material things to the Buddha. For example, offering flowers, fruits, incense. And it's opposed to what's called pati puja. That's the offering of practice, doing serious Dhamma practice as a way of making an offering to the Buddha. And sometimes the Buddha will criticize monks who are concerned with amisa, that is, with material gains, with getting good food, good dwelling places, and not concerned with Dhamma. And even I'm told in India today, the word amisa is used for non-vegetarian food. In other words, for a meat-based diet. Okay, so the word Sa-misa means, it has the prefix so, which means with, and then with, we say a material base. So it's in relation to feeling, we take it to mean, I translate it as carnal feeling. That is feeling related to worldly things or sensual feeling. And then its opposite is niramisa. Niramisa means non-carnal, not related to sensual things. And from the way this word is used in the text, you see it relates to the higher achievements in meditation, particularly the achievement of jhana, meditative absorption, deep insight experiences, and particularly the realizations of stages of liberation. Okay, so when one is experiencing feeling, this is a way to tune in more precisely to the nature of the feeling, and that is to identify whether this feeling is concerned with something worldly or sensual. For example, a pleasant feeling that arises from sensual fantasies, a painful feeling that arises from a failure to achieve, say, worldly success, worldly position, a worldly or carnal neutral feeling. That would be this kind of what I call this dull indifference, this dull comfort, which sucks one down more deeply into delusion and complacency. Okay, so those are the carnal feelings. And then the spiritual feelings, the pleasant feeling, the spiritual pleasant feeling would be the feeling of joy, delight, bliss that might arise through the focusing of the mind. Or even before that, it could be the feeling of, say, delight or joy that comes from maybe coming to a Buddha's temple, seeing images of Buddha, Bodhisattvas, being in contact with Sangha. So sometimes situations like this cause feelings of joy and happiness to arise. So those would be spiritual, pleasant feelings. Then a spiritual painful feeling, maybe it's a little difficult to understand, but this is a feeling of, we call this dissatisfaction, discontent, even oppression that arises because of one's present inability to achieve the high attainments and realizations that one aspires to. The example is given in the sutras of a monk who aspires to reach the levels of liberation of the noble one, but he's not able to achieve even the first jhana. And so he has this strong yearning, when, sort of the feeling of, alas, when will I be able to reach these realizations of the noble one, these liberations of the noble one? And then that causes a kind of pain. And then the spiritual feeling of it's neither pleasant nor painful, this would be the feeling of equanimity that occurs when one has achieved, say, a balanced mind. And so when it's not being swayed by likes and dislikes, by pleasure and pain, but one is able to maintain a state of calm equanimity in the face of changing circumstances in the world. And then the high point of this spiritual neutral feeling would be in the higher jhanas, where the mind goes beyond even the bliss and joy of the lower jhanas and become stable, established stably in this neutral feeling. Okay, so this takes us through the main passage on feeling, contemplation of feeling. And then we come to the refrain in regard to feeling. So the text says, in this way he dwells contemplating feelings and feelings internally, or he dwells contemplating feelings and feelings externally, which normally means the feelings that are taking place in others. And again, as I mentioned at the last meeting, in regard to the body, now the same problem in regard to feelings. We all feel our own, or experience our own feelings internally. How can I experience the feeling of another person externally? I don't know the answer to this. One could say somebody who has developed telepathic powers, even that person, he might know what the other person is feeling, but he won't be able to feel the feeling of another person. He'll just know the feeling. So I would say even for one with telepathic powers, he can't contemplate feelings and feelings even of another person. He could just know what the feelings are, but can't actually experience them, so far as I understand. The other way to understand this is just that one could understand from a person's behavior what they're feeling. For example, if somebody is holding up their leg with a contorted expression on the face, one knows that the person might be feeling a pain in the leg. Or if somebody is lying in the bed ill, with mouth gaping open, face somewhat twisted, then one knows that the person is experiencing pain, even though one doesn't feel it. If somebody has a bright smile on their face, and from their manners and gestures they look really happy, then one can infer that that person's experiencing pleasant feelings. But again, I come across the problem when still is just making an inference. One can't actually observe the feeling of that other person. So how to understand the text? I don't know. Anybody have any ideas? Maybe somebody can illuminate for me. Anyway, in that case, you just have to leave it. It's a little bit of a puzzle, unless somebody comes up and can offer a clear explanation. Okay, so then he dwells contemplating feelings and feelings both internally and externally. Yeah, I should say that some contemporary meditation teachers have given their own explanations of what it means to feel or contemplate the feelings externally. I think this is Goenka's explanation. Feeling the feelings internally means one goes deep into the body and one contemplates the sensations taking place deep in the body. And contemplating the feelings externally means that one brings the attention to the surface of the body and one experiences the feelings taking place on the surface of the body. But I have to say, this is what we might call I would call it a contrived explanation or a rationalized explanation. Because in the text, whenever the word bahida, external, is used, it always refers to what is taking place outside oneself, especially in reference to other people. Okay, so then, anyway, we just have to leave that in brackets as an unresolved problem. Okay, so then he dwells contemplating in feelings, their nature of arising, or he dwells contemplating in feelings, their nature of vanishing, or he dwells contemplating in feelings, their nature of both arising and vanishing. In my own rather poor experience, I say that this seems a little bit artificial to me, this distinction of either arising or vanishing, or arising and vanishing. In my own, I say, poor experience, one usually becomes aware of arising and vanishing together. As one is observing the feelings, one sees them come in and then pass away, come in and pass away, arise and pass away. But what one finds as one builds up the strength of mindfulness and focused concentration on feelings or any object of experience, that once one is entering deep into the stream of observation, the stream of contemplation, observing arising and passing away, at a certain point the aspect of arising drops into the background, and all that stands out is the aspect of passing away or vanishing. And so if one is hearing a sound, the sound is broken down into just micro moments of the sound, and each micro moment is just passing, vanishing, vanishing, vanishing. If one attends to a sensation in the body, one observes the sensation is just a sequence of moments of sensation, each of which is breaking up and vanishing, breaking up and vanishing, breaking up and vanishing. And then when one extends that awareness to the whole body globally, then one experiences the body just as a mass of feelings or sensations which are breaking up and vanishing. Okay, so this is the contemplation of arising and passing away, or else one can set up simply the mindfulness that there is feeling, simply to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and for consistency of mindfulness. Here one is stepping back even from the attempt to deliberately focus in on arising and passing away, and just simply observing whatever feelings arise. Naturally, one will be seeing these feelings breaking up and passing away, but one is not making the deliberate attempt to focus in on that aspect. One is just sort of stepping back and observing with a kind of, they call it an open awareness, a panoramic awareness, to observe whatever feeling arises. And then comes the conclusion, and he dwells independent, not clinging to anything in the world. And that is how the monk dwells, contemplating feelings and feelings. Okay, maybe at this point I'll pause and ask whether there are any questions. Yes, John?
Well, you could review the connection between delusion and the absence of presence of painful feelings. Maybe that was the kind of thing to get there.
Okay, the question, did you? Okay. The question concerns the connection between this neither painful nor pleasant feeling and delusion. Actually, delusion would underlie all three feelings, because when pleasant feeling arises and then one grasps onto it, trying to hold to it, becomes attached to it, that grasping attitude is also arising from delusion or ignorance. And when aversion arises towards painful feeling, again, this is a kind of manifestation of delusion or ignorance, because one doesn't know that painful feeling is intrinsic in the nature of existence, and when it's not able to step back and just know and observe the painful feeling. But the special condition, it said, the special triggering condition for neutral feeling the special triggering condition for delusion is this neutral feeling. And I think this works on several levels. One is the level of, we call it the ordinary person's experience. Or you could say in our own experience in the course of our ordinary everyday lives. In the course of our ordinary lives, we have large gaps, large spell periods when there's this neutral feeling is predominant. And this neutral feeling, we say, engenders in us a kind of sense, I call it a dull comfort. It's not the strong pleasure that arouses the attachment and the craving, but it's a kind of dull comfort which lulls us into a sense of security, that we lose sight of the instability of our lives. We lose fact that we're driven towards old age, sickness, and death. We lose sight of the fact that the world around us, that seems so stable and secure, can suddenly collapse, as many people are now experiencing with this meltdown of the economy. Or just in our everyday lives, you take the so-called couch potato sitting on his comfortable sofa in the living room with his, they call it the remote control, flicking through television programs, nothing especially interesting on, but he's sitting there just maybe drinking a beer, chewing on the pretzels, flipping through the TV station. So this is the kind of predominantly neutral feeling which is just sustaining that dullness and delusion. Okay, so this is the way delusion neutral feeling sustains delusion at the level of ordinary everyday experience. But then the Buddha, in some of the suttas, he brings us up to the level of, people, it's a high development of meditative experience, where there are Are you listening to something? Oh, I see. The microphone's right. Okay. Okay, then there are some suttas that bring this up to a high level of meditative experience, where in the fourth jhana, the dominant feeling is, and then beyond the fourth jhana, what are called the formless meditation, the sphere of infinite space, sphere of infinite consciousness, and so on. In those meditations, the prevalent feeling is neither pleasant nor painful feeling. Okay, now there were yogis in the time of the Buddha, even today, who achieve these meditations, but they don't have, say, the perspective, the lens of insight wisdom to be able to examine them from the standpoint of their constitution as phenomena. And so when they reach these very peaceful, very tranquil stages of meditation, then they develop a subtle attachment to them or a liking to them. And because of that subtle attachment, that liking for them, that will bring the consciousness to rebirth in a particular realm that corresponds to that meditative attainment. And it will keep that particular yogi, meditator, within the sphere of birth and death. But what the Buddha recommends is, after reaching that meditation, then or those stages of any of those stages of meditation, then one steps back from it and observes it as a conditioned phenomena, something brought about through effort, volition, other conditioning factors, and therefore impermanent, subject to vanishing. And then that breaks the delusion regarding it. Okay, maybe it's good if you take the microphone. Are you wrong? You're wrong.
Finally, I have a follow-up question. Eva and I have discussed this before, and because we had trouble figuring out what is neither painful nor pleasant feeling. If you have a dull comfort, isn't that a pleasant feeling? At least I know when I put through the remote control, I have a feeling of relaxation. That's a pleasant feeling, like the mindfulness.
Yeah, I think.
If then you go
Okay.
one jhana, wouldn't that be a pleasant feeling also? Otherwise, how would one form the path?
Okay. The question is, first, is not this dull comfort that I've been using as the example of the neutral feeling, isn't that a kind of pleasant feeling? I'd say technically it's a pleasant feeling. But let us say it's a pleasant feeling which is tending. It's very hard to pick up a really concrete example of the neutral feeling. So I'm using this as an example of a feeling we are familiar with, most of us have experienced. Even though I don't have a remote control or a Okay. It's a feeling most of us have experienced, and it's a feeling that I would say, so technically it's pleasant, but it's a feeling which is sliding towards or inclining towards the neither painful nor pleasant feeling. And maybe from this example that I used, we could extrapolate, and maybe by using our imaginations, we could think of some examples of the neither painful nor pleasant feeling, which suck us into this state of dull neutrality or dullness and complacency. Maybe just walking down the street on a day when the sky is cloudy, not heavily oppressive, and the mind is just wandering from thought to thought, not focused on anything. Perhaps we could take this as an example of that state of dull neutrality, or of neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Just use your imagination. Okay, then let me come to the second part of your question concerning the feeling that occurs in the fourth jhana, in the formless attainment. Now, technically, that is the neither painful nor pleasant feeling. In terms of the threefold classification, it's not pleasant feeling, but it's the neutral feeling. But even that neutral feeling can still give rise to this, what I call the subtle liking or subtle attachment. Because this is what it says, because it's peaceful, one becomes attached to it. Whereas in the case of pleasant feeling, it's because it's pleasurable or enjoyable that one becomes attached to it.
Then how about the state of equanimity?
The state of
equanimity. Equanimity, a liberated person's experience. Wouldn't that be a true feeling of either painful or pleasant?
Yeah, a liberated person, say an arahant, can experience all three feelings. It's not the case that he's always in a state of neither pleasant nor painful feelings. He'll never experience mental pain in the sense of dejection, sorrow, sadness, grief, worry, anxiety, any of those painful mental states, he'll never experience. But as long as he has the body, he'll experience painful bodily feelings. If he goes maybe a few days without a meal, the pain of hunger, he'll fall ill from time to time, experience even sharp, severe pain. Even to said the Buddha himself, sometimes he fell ill, experienced severe pains when he was wounded. That incident when Devadatta threw the stone at him, he got wounded, he experienced extremely painful feelings. Okay, but the painful feelings don't disturb the equanimity of the mind, because the liberated person can just observe them as painful feelings without being pulled down by them. Okay, then he'll experience pleasant feelings. It can be just even from the scenery. For example, when coming upon maybe a beautiful open field, the view of high mountains, the view of a sunset, that could inspire enjoyment, joy, and happiness. Even in the arhat, he's not just living like a block of stone, completely immune to these impressions. And then, of course, when he goes into the meditations, the jhanas, he goes through the stages of joy, pleasure, bliss, and so on in the jhanas. So he'll experience painful feelings, pleasant feelings.
So is it correct to say that whether the stage of pleasantness or painfulness comes from perception? Even a liberated person can have likes and dislikes. And whether one likes something or just because you said it's an affected undertone, affected coloring. Yeah. And that affected undertone coloring has a root. And in my mind, it has to come from the perception. I perceive as something that I like or perceive something I don't like. Or does it come from consciousness?
These are getting to be rather abstract questions. Okay. First, I just have to correct something. You say that, I would say a liberated person doesn't have dislikes in the sense of feeling some kind of emotional aversion or something. Of course, let us say, in our hearts is walking down a street and there's a group of boys around who are mischievous boys and they throw stones at him and shout at him abusive words at him. It happened very often to the Buddha himself and his disciples when they would pass through Brahminic villages where there was antagonism to the shramanas, the ascetics. They would be abused and ridiculed. In situations like that, they would develop equanimity, and then maybe compassion towards their tormentors, and equanimity towards the situation, not dislike. But there would be things that they would have a liking for, but not with greed or attachment. For example, the Buddha had certain places where he preferred to stay for the rainy season, for various reasons. Okay, so likes and dislikes. And to what extent this is due to perception. What I would say is that there's a certain objective basis for these feelings, which is not purely perceptual, but that through perception one can change one's reactions to these objective bases. For example, situation of passing through a village of Brahmins who are antagonistic to Buddhism. There's a certain objective basis here for not feeling pleased, getting hit by stones, being shouted at, being denied offerings of food and accommodation. Okay, so this is an objective basis for certain feelings, but through perception, one is able to change one's reaction so that an ordinary undeveloped person, when meeting conditions like that, will be pulled down by them, will feel dejected, hurt, maybe anger towards those who are abusing him. Or somebody with a developed mind, by changing the perception, is able to change the feelings and the attitude under those conditions. And so perception is a factor, but still there's a certain objective basis, like being hit by stones, being shouted at and called useless, ascetic, parasite, and so on. It's certainly less pleasant than being warmly welcomed, being brought into a mandapa, a hall, being offered drinking water, refreshments. Certainly there's a difference in the objective situation. Read Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 50, which I'll discuss next time at Bodhi Monastery. It's interesting in showing how perception can change, how the wrong perception can get one sucked into a situation, either agreeable or disagreeable, and how changing one's perception can enable one to rise above the conflicting situation.
So the changing perception is volition. It's no longer a feeling. My proper feeling is that it's a state.
Yeah.
So it should be intuitive, not even reactive, intuitive definition. What constitutes pleasant or unpleasant?
Yeah.
If it goes into changing perception, we're already at the later stage. We already decide that I want to, with the volition, practice. So when I observe, it seems to be there's no way to observe feeling unless it's something very strong, very easy. Everybody knows it's painful. Otherwise, it's like dull comfort. To me, it seems to be always on the pleasant side. My explanation is that we always constantly swing between pleasant and unpleasant feelings all the time. It's the midpoint that's either painful or pleasant. So once you have that point from pleasant to unpleasant, it becomes unpleasant. Now refrain unpleasant and bring back to pleasant. So my whole life is feeling like this.
Well, practice diligently and you'll have longer stretches of neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Okay, any urgent questions? Okay, this person in the back. What is your name? Is that Barbara Green? No.
Before you were asking for did anybody have an explanation possibly for the external?
Yeah.
And I was wondering if empathy to someone's feelings would be more of an external.
Actually, that's a good suggestion.
Because you're observing it and when you come into state, you really start to feel their feelings.
Yeah. So that's a good suggestion. I never thought of it from that angle.
And
So, still, I mean, empathy. Okay, it's a good suggestion. I'm not sure whether that's the original intent of the text, but it's a good suggestion. In a certain sense, though, when one isn't really in the meditative way observing their feelings, but the empathy gives one a good sense to it could be a good way to understand how one senses the feelings of others. A good example. Yes, you're going to say something else.
The comfort that we were just talking about,
the dull comfort?
The dull comfort, would that daydream, you could be in neither pleasant nor agitated or unpleasant state in a daydream state?
Yeah, I think a daydreaming could be an example of this neutral feeling.
Neutral.
Yeah. There are probably many examples from everyday life. Even just, again, say sitting on the train, going to work every day, sitting on a bus, the same bus that one takes every day, just looking abstractly out the window. Maybe if one fine-tunes the feelings, will see a succession, sometimes pleasant feelings, sometimes painful feelings. But there'll be many occasions of that neutral feeling there. Okay, Boy, did you have a question?
Is the delusion underlying the seventh factor of enlightenment?
Seventh factor of enlightenment. Equanimity. So let us say that the seven factors of enlightenment are intended to bring about an ending of delusion. That's why they're called factors of enlightenment. So perhaps even when one is developing the equanimity, enlightenment, factor of enlightenment, on some occasions in that equanimity there'll be occasions of delusion, but you say the general drift when all the seven factors of enlightenment are working together, their task is to uproot ignorance and delusion. And so we say that they're opposed to delusion. Okay, I want to move on now to come into the next foundation of mindfulness. Okay, this is called Chittanupassana, contemplation of the mind. And the operative term here, key word here, is the word chitta. Okay, first, the way Chittanupassana, or contemplation of mind, is taught within the living Buddhist traditions. Sometimes it can be integrated into what we might call a holistic approach to the four foundations of mindfulness. That is, within the particular system, one might be using one foundation as the basis, say the body, but then when particular noticeable states of mind arise, then one will just momentarily attend to those states of mind. This is the way Chittanupassana is used within the system of insight taught by Mahasi Sayadaw, where one makes the base object the arising and falling of the abdomen, but whenever the mind or states of mind become particularly prominent, then one makes the mental note of those states of mind. And then one returns to the observation of the rising and falling. But there are some systems of meditation, of insight meditation, which take observation of the state of mind as the main approach, the main vehicle. And so they might begin the meditator with maybe mindfulness of breathing, just to get some experience in controlling the mind. But once one reaches a certain level with the mindfulness of breathing, then one switches over and just focuses on the state of mind, observing whatever state of mind is arising until one can discern the state of mind at subtler levels, at an increasingly quicker tempo. Okay, now the key word here is citta, the word citta. The word citta is what we ordinarily translate as mind. But sometimes citta is identified with consciousness, that which is aware. But now it's interesting, if we look in the description in the text of how one practices contemplating mind as mind, the text says, here a monk understands a mind with lust as a mind with lust, a mind without lust as a mind without lust, similarly with hatred, without hatred, with delusion, without delusion. And what I find interesting here is that one is identifying the citta, the state of mind, not, this might sound a little obscure, but I'll say it, one is not observing or identifying citta in itself, but one is identifying the citta, the state of mind, in terms of factors with which it is associated, or in terms of factors that accompany the citta. Here, the way Buddhist psychology understands the mind the way Buddhist psychology understands the mind, we have in any state of mind basically two components. One of these is citta itself, which is the aspect of awareness or consciousness, the knowing, you could say the bare knowing, the bare awareness. And then we have a variety of factors that arise in association with the citta. Among these factors are feelings, perceptions, but the most important for giving the coloring to the mind, its particular quality, especially its ethical quality, are the volitional states, the volitional factors. And so, in this exercise of contemplating the citta, the way I see it, one is not really focusing in on citta itself, citta as the bare awareness, as the bare knowing, but one is identifying a citta, a state of mind, in terms of the factors with which it is connected, the factors that accompany the citta. I think the reason for this is because citta as bare awareness is something extremely subtle, extremely difficult to separate and to tune into on its own. And so in performing the exercise of understanding the citta, or contemplating the citta, what one does is to define the particular citta, the particular state of mind, in terms of its companions, its accompanying factors. And the Buddha does this initially in terms of particular ethical factors, because the Buddha is concerned in the practice with the wholesome development of the mind. And to develop the wholesome mind, to make the mind pure, strong, more strongly established in the wholesome, one has to distinguish what are the particular factors that make the mind wholesome, and what are the factors that make it unwholesome. And in terms of the Buddha's broad overview of the constitution of the mind, as I mentioned earlier, the Buddha has singled out 3 factors as the unwholesome roots. These are greed or lust, hatred, and delusion. Okay, so initially one has to distinguish when the chitta, when the mind is accompanied by lust, when it's accompanied by hatred, when it's accompanied by delusion, or when it is without lust, without hatred, without delusion. And what's interesting here is we can raise the question, what is doing the observation here? And what's doing the observation is chitta, it's the mind. And so the way I understand this, and again I have to put the warning label, this is my own interpretation, this doesn't come from Buddha's text or commentary, but my own understanding of what is taking place. There's a certain, what do you call this, the duality in the mind, or a double nature to the mind. One, let's say, duality of aspect to the mind. One is the aspect of the mind which actually undergoes the mental state. This is the mind which is subject to moods, governed by thoughts, propelled by emotions, lifted up, swung down, which surrenders to unwholesome impulses, which restrains from unwholesome impulses. Okay, so this is the active, involved mind. And then there's an aspect of the mind which is simply aware, simply observing. And now, in our ordinary life, sort of untrained, undisciplined life, the aspect of the mind which is aware, which is observing, is recessive. It's there in the background, but in a state almost of suspended animation, hibernation. And so the mind goes through its moods, it's swung up and down, swung back and forth by its emotions, pushed up and down by changing thoughts. And then we just go on from emotion to emotion, from mood to mood, from thought to thought, going like this throughout our days. In a way we could say that is the nature of samsara, just the ever-shifting flow of mental events. But there's this other aspect of the mind which is just aware, just observing. And what one does when one practices contemplation of the mind, cittanupassana, is that one brings that observing section of the mind into activity. One sort of turns it on. one ignites it, turns the key in the ignition, and the observing factor of the mind then rises up, taking as its object not anything outside, but taking as its object the active, involved, driven aspect of the mind. And so initially, one is watching, observing whatever takes place in the mind, noting what's taking place, not just turning away from it, but noting it, but not becoming involved with it, not getting swept away by it. Of course, as one is trying to observe, there will be periods where the act of observation gets turned off, and then one falls into the into the flow of thoughts, the swing of moods, and there's the stream of fantasies, projections, plans, memories, anticipations, worries. But because one knows that one's task is simply to observe the mind, repeatedly one reminds oneself, hey, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. Then one steps back again and takes up the position of the observer, simply observing the mind. And then what happens as one observes the mind, again and again, stepping back into the position of the observer, is that the flow of conflicting thoughts, the flow of disturbed emotions, the flow of fantasies, projections, desires, this starts to quiet down, to subside and become still, until the power, the brightness, the luminosity of the observing part becomes stronger and stronger, until it floods the whole mind with a kind of peace, quiescence, stillness, and the observing part is now dominant over the observed. Okay, but this is my own explanation of what is going on in the practice. Okay, but now coming back to our text, we see that initially, we could say the first 6 items, altogether we have in contemplation of the mind 16 items which are grouped into 8 pairs. And the first 6 items, the first 3 pairs, the first 6 items present this antithesis between the state of mind which is connected with a particular defilement, greed or lust, hatred or delusion, and the state of mind that's free from that defilement. And so even when the mind arises with defilements, as it were bound to happen, instead of surrendering to the defilement and acting on the basis of that defilement, one simply notes a mind with thoughts of lust has arisen, a mind with states of anger and aversion and hatred has arisen. The mind is maybe just having daydreams and fantasies. This is the mind of delusion has arisen. And then there'll come times when the mind breaks free of those unwholesome states, when it becomes bright, luminous, calm. Then one notes the mind is now, at least temporarily, without lust, without hatred, without delusion. Okay, the fourth pair is an antithesis between two unwholesome states of mind. But these are, we call these the minor unwholesome qualities, whereas greed, hatred, and delusion, those are the major unwholesome qualities. But now we have the subtle defilements come in. One is expressed as the contracted mind. This is a mind which is overcome by tina mida, sometimes translated sloth and torpor, or dullness and drowsiness. The mind which has become heavy, dull, drowsy. This is also a mind connected with delusion. Actually, both this and the next are connected with delusion. Then its antithesis is the distracted mind, or the agitated, restless mind. If we think in terms of the five hindrances, we have lust as representing sensual desire, hatred represents ill will, the hindrance of ill will, and the contracted mind represents sloth and torpor, and the distracted mind represents restlessness and remorse. Okay, then the next, he's taken 3, 4 pairs, 8. The next 4 pairs are concerned with higher states of meditation. Okay, he understands an exalted mind is exalted. The exalted mind will be a mind which has reached the level of jhana or samadhi. An unexalted mind as unexalted. He understands the surpassable mind is surpassable. That is, when one reaches one level of jhana, one knows that there's a next level above it, and so one makes the effort to go for the level above that, and then one keeps on going up and up and up till one reaches the highest stage of samadhi. Then one knows that as an unsurpassable mind. Then a concentrated mind is concentrated, an unconcentrated mind is unconcentrated. I have to confess, I don't know what this particularly adds to the others. It seems, I have to say, a little bit artificial when we can know from other texts that an exalted mind is a mind in samadhi. So why add the concentrated mind is concentrated and the unconcentrated is unconcentrated? I don't know. And then he understands a liberated mind is liberated and an unliberated mind is unliberated. Now the way this word liberated is used here, this is the way the commentaries explain it, and I would tend to agree with them. It doesn't mean the mind which has been fully liberated from all the defilements, that is the mind of the Arahant. Because this is part of the practice of Satipatthana, so it's still dealing with a practice that's part of the path. And so the commentaries explain that this refers to the temporary liberation of the mind that occurs as one is going up the stages of samadhi, into deeper and deeper stages of samadhi. So when the mind still has the 5 hindrances, then one knows it's unliberated. When the mind is free from the 5 hindrances and enters the first jhana, then one knows the mind is liberated from the 5 hindrances. But one still has initial and applied thought, or thought and examination, vitakka and vichara. So then one knows that the mind is not yet liberated from thought and examination. So then one goes to the second jhana, and one is liberated from thought and examination, but one still has rapture or joy, and so one knows to that extent the mind is not liberated. So then one practices further, joy fades away and one enters the third jhana. Then one knows one is liberated from joy. But one still has pleasant feelings, one knows one is not yet liberated from that. One practices further, one enters the fourth jhana, and then one is liberated even from pleasant feelings into neutral feelings. And similarly, one goes up from the fourth jhana in similar ways through the formless attainments till one reaches the highest formless attainment. And so the mind is not yet liberated from all defilements, but this is a kind of temporary liberation through the stages of samadhi. And also this could be applied to insight knowledge. As one is developing the insight knowledges, when one still has a particular obstacle to understanding, one knows one is not liberated from that, but when one gains this next stage of insight, then one becomes liberated from that particular obstacle, then one meets the next obstacle to insight. As one's insight goes further, one penetrates that obstacle and one is liberated from that. And in this way one goes through the stages of insight. Okay, and then we have the repetitive or the refrain regarding the mind, contemplating it internally, externally. Again, my old problem, but perhaps your suggestion, Barbara's suggestion of empathy is at least helpful to understand internally and externally the nature of arising, nature of vanishing, nature of both, and the nature of arising and vanishing in regard to the mind. This is very important to light up or illuminate the impermanence of citta, so that one doesn't hold to citta as being some kind of permanent entity, like a permanent self. So even that observing aspect of the mind, which is lighting up the contents of the mind, when one turns back on that observing aspect, one sees that too arises and passes away. That too is subject to this constant impermanence. Or else the mindfulness is set up just on the mind itself, simply standing back, observing the mind with the awareness, this is the mind. And then he dwells independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That's how he dwells, contemplating mind as mind. Okay, so this will conclude the exposition. I'll ask now whether there are any questions. Okay, Bolway has questions. Bolway.
I think I'm confused about the dual aspect of the mind and the traditional way of the mind and its mental factors.
Yeah.
Are you, in your dual aspect of the mind, do you include the mental factors into the observed part?
What I would say is that mental factors are involved both in the observation and in the observed part. In the observed part, what I would say is that mental factors are probably more prominent, since what one is observing will be thoughts, emotions, moods. So these are taking place within the citta, so this is part of the citta. But it's a part of the citta which one is put under observation. And then in the act of observation, okay, citta is what provides the aspect of awareness, the aspect of knowing, but there's also present sati, which is the mindfulness, You say the mindfulness is what is bringing the content of the mind, what is opening up the content of the mind and making it perceptible, making it discernible. And then there is the clear comprehension, which is focusing in and understanding what is the particular thought, what is the particular mood, what is the particular volitional factor that is accompanying the citta at this moment. So there's mental factors both in the observing and the observed section.
Can citta arise by itself without mental factors anytime?
No, the citta is always accompanied by mental factors. But I'll explain this a little more next time in connection with the five aggregates. Of course, citta is identified with the aggregate of consciousness. And the aggregate of consciousness is always accompanied by feeling, perception, and the volitional formation. Okay, question here. Your name is?
George.
George, okay.
It seems to me that the contemplation of mind and the contemplation of feeling is very, very intertwined.
Very much so.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And it seems to me, I'm just saying, it seems like the contemplation of mind would come first before the contemplation of feeling. Because everything comes from the mind.
Yeah, first, I don't think one has to see the sequence of the four satipatthānas as following a rigidly fixed order. So I think that there is a reason why they're set out in this order. I think that there's an increasing degree of subtlety. So it begins with the body as the grossest, most evident object. Then the feeling is somewhat coarser, more obvious than the mind. To focus in on the state of mind requires more effort, so that's why it's subtler. Okay, the two are very, as you say, they're very, very closely intertwined. They're distinct factors. They're closely intertwined in that, especially in that the feeling is what can trigger off these particular states of mind, or factors that arise accompanying the mind. As we explained earlier, the pleasant feeling triggers off greed, and so pleasant feelings will tend to give rise to a mind accompanied by greed. Unpleasant feeling, a painful feeling will tend to trigger off aversion or dislike, and so it will give rise to a mind accompanied by aversion. And then the neutral feeling will tend to be not observed, and so it will tend to give rise to or be accompanied by the mind of delusion. Okay, John?
I sort of have a tendency, and probably erroneous, to want to associate with the citta, the observing part of the mind, sort of a guardian role. It's observing. I suppose it's not supposed to be passing judgment, but it's observing, and that brings into my mind the question of how does this relate to karma and volition? I assume volition is not in the citta part of the mind, but is mixed in with the faculties. The associated factors.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see how these three components would work together, or four components would fit together. Maybe it's, I'm trying to force them in a way that's inappropriate.
Maybe rephrase the question. I'm not quite sure that I got the question.
I tend to see citta, the observing part of the mind, as having sort of a guardian's role.
Guardian's role.
It's observing.
Yeah.
And perhaps erroneously, I also tend to see it as passing judgment. This is right, this is not.
It's passing judgment.
Passing judgment
Yeah.
on the factors of the mind.
Yeah.
Greed.
Yeah.
And then, so that's one thing. Since I want to add this role to citta, role being that of a guardian,
Yeah.
I want to connect it to karma and
Yeah.
volition.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how these four components all fit together. Karma, volition, chitta as the observant part of the mind, and then the associated factors.
Seems like a good question for a doctoral dissertation.
Maybe I'm trying to force too much together.
No, it's a good question, but hard to answer very briefly. Okay, let us say that volition is what creates karma. The three roots of unwholesome karma are greed, or lust, hatred, and delusion. Non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion are the roots of wholesome karma. Okay, so now when one steps back and takes this position of the observer, the guardian, as you call it, then one is observing these unwholesome states of mind, and doing this, I would say, undermines them, so that they're not able to run out on their own and become motives, provoking the creation of unwholesome karma. Of course, the unwholesome state of mind technically is also an unwholesome karma, but because one is constantly pulling back to the position of the observer, noticing these states of mind with mindfulness, then they're not able to become more active. I use an analogy to illustrate this. It's like we have a shoplifter, a person who's a habitual shoplifter, comes into the shop. Now if there are these mirrors in all of the corners, and there's somebody, the shoplifter sees that there's somebody washing the mirrors, or a video player recording what's going on in the shop. The shoplifter is still a habitual shoplifter, but because he's being watched and knows he's being watched, he's not going to steal things. And so, in a similar way, greed, hatred, delusion, when they're being watched, are not going to steal things, to just run out on the loose and indulge in unwholesome deeds, create unwholesome karma. Okay, so in that way, there's a sort of restraining order is issued to them, not to indulge in creating unwholesome karma. Technically, that act of observation, because it's a wholesome state of mind that's observing, it's creating wholesome karma. But the practice of mindfulness, of the foundations of mindfulness, is not part of the simple meritorious path aimed at a higher rebirth by creating ordinary wholesome karma, but it's part of the path of liberation, which is intended to demobilize the creation of any type of karma, wholesome or unwholesome. So it's creating wholesome karma, but in a way which is moving towards the demobilization of the process of karmic creation. So that will be my brief answer.
Doesn't that imply, though, that there is within the chitta just observing the defilement, tends to restrain the defilement?
Yeah.
But that implies there's right and wrong contained in, it's like an observing parent. Observing a child. A child is a different analogy. There's right and wrong there. Where does that come from? That sense of right and wrong that's implied in your response.
Okay, let us say the person who's doing the observation has the sense, and also he would have learned this from learning the Dhamma, knowing that greed, hatred, delusion are unwholesome states of mind, that they lead to suffering, that they morally blameworthy, that they're states that have to be overcome. Okay, so he has this, and then he knows that the practice of mindfulness in this way, that this is part of the right mindfulness, which is part of the Noble Eightfold Path leading to liberation. So when doing the observation, one is not really supposed to be getting entangled in judgments of right and wrong, but one has this background knowledge, this kind of right view that one is bringing into the practice. And so when the unwholesome states arise, then one just notes them without acting upon them. Okay, I think we'll have to pause now. I will have to go across for the lunch. Then I will come back at 12 o'clock, as close as I can to 12 o'clock. Then we can continue the discussion for maybe another half an hour. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, I'll just recite it to make it go quickly. Okay, so we share the merits of speaking Dhamma, listening to Dhamma, with the Devas, the Bhutas or fair spirits, Nagas, dragon spirits, asking them to rejoice in these merits, to protect the Dhamma, to protect the world, to protect ourselves and others. Akasata Chibumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Hirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Chibumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Hirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chibumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Tirang Rakantu Mantaram Heta Vatata Amhehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya Vici Hetato Hetamtare Satakayupapanna Rupya Rupicha Pasanya Sanyino Dukha Pamusantu Pusantu Nibutim